All right, so hello, I'm Zach Lowy, creator of Ring Lines. Here today with the author of One Football No Nets, Justin Walley. How are you today, Justin?
Very well, thank you. Just come back from the Connie for AGM in Poland, so just taking it easy today.
Right now, what is for our listeners who don't know, what exactly is CONIFE?
Yeah, it's the Confederation of Independent Football Associations. So I suppose in the most simplistic way, it's all those kind of international teams that are not in FIFA. So you've got countries recognised by the UN, such as Tuvalu, and then you've got states such as Tibet that some people would recognise and others wouldn't, and then you've got different groups around the world. And I think one example is the Rohingyas from Burma, from Myanmar, who also have a team now in CONIFA.
Interesting. So, CONIFA basically takes a lot of disadvantaged groups like the Rohingya and Tibet, and basically allows them to play in a separate organization that they could not in other means play in FIFA, for example.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, FIFA's not going to entertain the idea of most of our teams
And
playing
why is
under their
that?
umbrella. Uh, some of it's down to interpretations of teams, and of course, some of those interpretations are fuzzy. Some people have issues, of course, with teams such as Kosovo and Gibraltar being in FIFA, but that's down to different people's interpretations, I guess. In CONIFA's case, it's very often. I think if you have a team like Tibet, I don't think that China is going to make it very comfortable for FIFA to allow that to happen. There's a couple of strange examples. I think in the South Pacific, the likes of Tuvalu and Kiribati, they're United Nations recognised teams, and yet FIFA haven't taken them into the fold, which is a strange one for me. But that's how it seems to be at the moment.
Now, I just want to get to this book, One Football No Nets, because this seems just a fascinating tale about one man's adventure to the other corner of the world, really pursuing something fascinating. So basically, just could you tell us what was your career like prior to I believe September 2017 when you became the manager of Matabeleland. Matabeleland. All right.
Yeah.
Which is an international team in Western Zimbabwe. So could you talk about what was your path before this?
Well, I've always had a passion for the game, and I've always played or been involved in teams. But I didn't make it as a professional. And around the time I graduated in those early years, I really was looking to establish myself with a career in football. Both in marketing, I wanted to get involved with kind of development and marketing in the game, and with coaching. And so I got involved in a couple of things back in those days. So you're talking sort of 95, 96 time. So I worked at the European Championships in England for one of the host cities. I was the assistant director of that. I had an interview with Tottenham at the time as well. And I also did my first coaching badge around that time, but things just didn't really work out for me as I'd wished, and then my life just took a bit of a different direction, really. And you have to fast forward quite a few years to me getting involved with a football club in Latvia in the Baltic states called Riga United, which I helped co-found. And as the years went on, that just got a bit more serious, and we developed it. And subsequently that became a much more serious thing, and my coaching became a more serious thing. So in the years prior to going to Matabeleland, I coached men's second league football in Latvia, women's Premier League football, and then I was looking for an opportunity to do something else, because I felt like I'd done that for long enough, and I really fancied something a bit different.
Right. And in September 2017, you became the national team manager of Matabeleland.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about how you landed on this job?
Yeah, as I said, I was looking for a different opportunity. I'd left Latvia. I wasn't even sure I wanted to stay in football at the time.
What is that?
Just I was exhausted. That was part of the reason why I left Latvia, because I found myself in a situation where I was head coach of one team. I was also a club secretary. I was responsible for the finances. I was on the board of the club. I was coaching kids teams, and it just became a bit too much. And yeah, I went traveling with my girlfriend at the time and was looking at different opportunities. And then, yeah, as I mentioned in the start of my book, I went somewhere alone, just a sort of a monastery of all places, just to have a sort of think about what I was going to do. And I came up with this kind of crazy idea. I wanted to be an international football manager, which, yeah, is as crazy as it sounds. But I sort of recognize that there's certain parts of the world where it's not about the badges, it's or the money. It's about just being willing to get involved in a setup that's really got limited resources. So yeah, I began looking at possible places, be it in women's or men's football. And then I think I understood with CONIFA that there was quite a few members there that needed help, really. And almost went to the South Pacific to coach. And then I got put in the direction of Matabeleland. And just had some conversations. I've traveled a lot, which and I've lived I lived for a brief time in Africa before, so that was an advantage, because obviously you're going into an environment not everybody's going to necessarily be able to deal with. And yeah, I got offered the opportunity to go out there as a voluntary role. But the exciting part of it was the development, and also the opportunity to take the team to a World Cup of sorts the following year.
Right. Now Matabeleland, it falls into CONIFA, and not FIFA, and you know, from what I've researched, it has had you know, plenty of wars, and it seems to have certain how do I say this? Well, certain disagreements with the government of Zimbabwe, you know, historically. So can you just talk about what do you feel were some of the major challenges you were looking at when coming to Matabeleland in 2017?
Before going, I wasn't that sure. I was going into the unknown to a great extent. I mean, I think we were aware that the Robert Mugabe government is quite, yeah, it's quite a not the easiest place on earth, perhaps, to operate. So I was a little bit concerned about that. I was a little bit concerned, to be honest, how I would be perceived. Was I there to be a troublemaker, which I wasn't? But there was, you know, I was aware that some people perhaps thought that was the reason for me being there, or perhaps the reason for the team. Really, we were trying to give an opportunity to a group of young men, really, to develop as footballers, and to give them opportunities, and to give, you know, a brighter situation to a community, really. So, you know, yeah, went into it a little bit fearful, and you know, the time I went in, things things were deteriorating economically, politically in the country. But I mean that as a whole, not specifically where I was in Zimbabwe, but I think in general that was how things were.
Got you. And how did the you were, as you were in Zimbabwe, really we were witnessing the for once finally the toppling of the Mugabe government, and everything that sort of had we had just come to expect. Mugabe, it seemed to be, he had been in power for a century. And finally, this was all toppling down. So how did you feel the effects of Mugabe's descent, not just as a coach, but as a resident in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, I mean, he'd been in power, I think it was 37 years, if I'm not mistaken. Most people that I came into contact with had never known a time before Mugabe. So, despite the fact he was in his mid-90s, I think no one really believed that he was going to go. So I think when the state apparatus is there, it's very controlled as a country in terms of what you do and how you behave. I think it's known that people are monitored. So you're aware of those things all the time. And I speaking personally, I made sure that I kept within all the boundaries, and that I didn't do anything that would upset the authorities. Because at the end of the day, I was there to coach a football team, to manage and help take a group of men to a tournament in London. When Mugabe was removed from power, there was obviously a lot of uncertainty about how things would go. Some people were predicting a bloodbath at the time, but fortunately, the transition from Mugabe to Mnangagwa at the time ran as smoothly as one could possibly hope for in that part of the world, to be honest with you. And if anything, we felt, I'd speak for myself, I felt a bit more, I don't know if safe's the right word, but I felt there was more freedom in the period after his removal.
You never felt at any point where there were riots or major looting or anything. There was never really the potential of violent unrest that could threaten your home or your life.
Well, the thing was that there was peaceful. Most of it ran very peacefully at the time, and the demonstrations were peaceful. And even when he was removed from power, the celebrations were peaceful. There was no need for the military to get involved with what was going on with the people themselves in that sense. So it was more, a question of what could happen, what might happen. So I was always in this position of I might be leaving and running to the border that very day, that very night. But it remains peaceful, and it's only now in the last 2 or 3 weeks that we have seen violence and looting in Zimbabwe, and there was an element of that just after the elections in the summer as well. But I wasn't there during that period.
All right. Robert Mugabe once said, "The only white man you can trust is a dead white man." So I just want to get your thoughts on how did you feel sort of living in this new society, really completely? Did you ever feel like totally like a fish out of water, or did it surprise you how easily Zimbabwe started to feel like home? Because I know that a lot of people would not feel as comfortable moving to a country,
Sure.
ruled by a dictator for so long.
I lived, in reference to your first point, I lived in an entirely black community.
Right.
I didn't know I didn't know any white people. I came across white people. I saw it's a very small community there, but on a daily basis, it wasn't uncommon. I didn't see a single white person, and I didn't come into contact with white people, and I was accepted into the community. I didn't. I think after I've been there a few days, and you become less aware, self-conscious yourself, being a different color skin to everybody around you. I was treated so well that I didn't think too much about it, and I had a very positive experience in terms of how I was treated and accepted by the community there. I have, yeah, I lived briefly in Sierra Leone before, and I've travelled. I've probably been to about 15 countries in Africa. So,
Wow.
yeah, I think I was able to, um, yeah, assimilate perhaps a bit more quickly than some people might, perhaps. But ultimately, it came from how I was treated, and I was treated very well. So it really wasn't a big issue, and I think as well, in the case of Zimbabwe, it's former British Commonwealth, and there's a certain familiarity in Zimbabwe that just reminds you of home, or of growing up in the 70s or 80s, as I did. It's there's certain similarities, and with the language especially. They speak English, but there's also a kind of an old school colloquial 80s thing going on there. So yeah,
Interesting.
I felt on the whole, I felt very comfortable.
So did you start to feel like a child again in certain aspects? You know, sort of bringing you back to your childhood with that
There
colloquialism.
were, there were reminders, just because in Bulawayo, you walk around and sometimes it looks like it's set in a time warp of the 80s in some ways. So you see these brands like Woolworths that are kind of pretty much gone from here, from the UK, or you see advertising boards up, and the fonts are very much sort of an 80s font, or early 90s, um, and just a general vibe that puts a lot of infrastructure is not been updated since that time. So um, a lot of stuff that reminds you of the past. Some of it very nice in a way.
Right. Um, so aside from that familiarity, you've lived in a number of different countries, but what were some unique aspects of Zimbabwe and Zimbabwean culture that you really liked, that just made you feel really at peace? Are there any certain things you'll always remember from that?
The thing about Zimbabwe is it's in many ways it's the the best country in Africa, in a sense of just the potential. Well, the potential's there for it to be the finest country in Africa, and I think once
Yeah.
upon a time it was in a better place than South Africa is.
Hmm.
And there's almost as a sort of mention, there's almost a sweetness to it, an old school vibe of it. Um, and it's a very nice, pleasant, comfortable place when things run relatively smoothly. The problem is you've got an economic and political situation which is not the best, and especially the economics. When people can't, they don't have the money to put the food on the table, when there's fuel shortages, this kind of thing.
Hmm.
It makes life difficult. But I yeah, I had to, in a way, it's just it's a familiarity with an old Britain of the 80s to some extent.
Right.
without yeah, there's an aspect to that to it somehow.
Now, was your financial life ever complicated by living in perhaps a more financially volatile country than Britain? Do you know were your payments ever late, or did you ever, can you just talk about what?
Yep.
Yeah,
Well, there were no payments because I was a
right.
voluntary coach.
Okay.
So what happened was I went there. You can't. There's no ATM machines to take cash out.
Wow.
Only domestic cards, but they'd stopped working, and then there was a limit of $10 a day for people. So yeah, I had to go in with forex. Excuse me. So I went in with euros and dollars and some
Hmm.
pounds, and I had to try and live on and change that up into the bond dollar, which is the currency that's used there,
Hmm.
alongside the US dollar,
Right.
um, and just use my money and see how far it would go. But I stayed with a family, and generally most days I didn't spend too much money. I just tended to go to football training, go for a walk, and my the money I had, it had to last for the period of time I was there. But it's when I started to run out of money, then it's a problem, and I actually managed to get a wire of money sent to me from abroad into the country. So $200 was sent from the UK, which I got out of Western Union, if I remember correctly. Um, and that was really the only way I could have enough money to get through that period.
Now, it says you were once accused of being a Kremlin spy.
Right.
What was that like?
Well, that's if you fast forward to after the CONIFA World Cup, I went to Russia for the FIFA World Cup.
Mhm.
So that was purely as a fan. Um, and what happened was I was still doing social media, the Twitter that I'd been doing with Matabeleland. So I had a fairly decent following of engaged followers, and yeah, some of my tweets kind of went viral. And then I got messages from a couple of journalists who were basically suggesting that the nice things I was saying about Russia were I was saying them because I was a Russian asset.
And these were
Uh,
from which outlets exactly?
well, there's an organization called Stop Fake. I believe it's a Ukrainian-based organization, but there was a journalist there, particularly was seemed to be convinced that I was somehow on an all-paid expenses trip by the Kremlin, and
And can I just say I was in Russia for 10 days for the World Cup.
yeah,
They did a great job with running everything. And I'm not a Kremlin spy at all,
yeah.
but I honestly had no complaints. That I thought the security did a great job. I thought everything was on time, and I really couldn't have expected a better run tournament.
Well, that was it. It was just, I mean, I call a spade, to be honest. I'm not the most politically correct person in the world. So if I like something, I like to say I like it. And if I don't like something, I tend to tell the truth. And I just had a very pleasant experience there. I had a lot of fun. And I was just positive about things I felt were positive. And I've said the same thing about, previous tournaments I've been to in other countries. But some people they either don't believe it because they just see a country like Russia as always somehow being bad, or they have their own agenda somehow that they want to use you and spin what you're saying and try and politicize it. But it was all, it was very surreal, and it kind of turned into a bit of a comedy because I had a lot of people engaging in those conversations and kind of making fun of those people. And the idea that somehow I'd been recruited by the Russians to go and coach in Zimbabwe was one kind of suggestion, which was really hilarious. So
Yeah.
yeah,
You do have quite the international connection, though, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Yes.
In fact, I want to just. I mean, you've pretty much been all over the world. I from what I've researched, you've promoted AIDS education in Africa. You've worked in Latvia, and it seemed that at a certain point you had been kind of burnt out, and this became all-consuming. Would you say that the Matabeleland job, where you were working as a volunteer, was basically about, giving you it was just allowing you to rediscover your passion in the game? Would you say it got the job done there?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, I just wanted to take a project on where, I mean, I could help people, but it was also beneficial to me in the sense of, I was achieving something I felt was positive. In a purely football sense, to be able to take a team to a World Cup was an incredible opportunity as well. I like adventures, so it ticked a lot of boxes for me. And yeah, I think the whole Conifer experience is a positive one. Having all those different teams in London playing together was fantastic. And yeah, I'm really honoured that I had that opportunity. Although I was completely exhausted at the end of it, in the same way that I'd been going into it, I think.
I want to go to another corner of the world now, Oceania. There was a certain point. Well, it seems where you were double crossed by a higher up in an Oceania Federation. What was that like?
It just was disappointing because I went there with honor. I was planning to go there again to help out with the team, and I had quite big plans along with my friend Tony. We were going to go as joint international managers, and I think we could have achieved some great things there. And
you were looking to be the head coach?
Really. Sorry?
You were looking to be the head coach?
Myself and a friend of mine, Tony McMullen's the coach I know, an English coach I know, works out in Latvia as well now. We were going to go as joint coaches, and yeah, we were all set to go, and then we were kind of, I guess you would call it, betrayed by the person setting it all up. So subsequently, yeah, we didn't go. So yeah, it was very upsetting, very disappointing, very annoying at the time. But fortunately, I was able to move on. I got the opportunity with Matabeleland, which I suspect was an even more exciting role. And my friend Tony had a child a short term after that. So our lives went very differently to how they might have been.
Very interesting. Can you just talk about your players in Matabeleland? Because it seems like these guys are really just doing it because they love the game. I mean, obviously, but they had barely any food. They were cramming into trucks and driving far distances to get to matches. What were some challenges that you saw these guys face? And do you feel like they were unique in their ability to resist these challenges, whereas perhaps other teams you've coached have not shown that kind of resilience?
Oh, I think if you compare it to most parts of Europe, for example, I mean, they live in a different kind of world. They have challenges that most people couldn't imagine. That's their lives. They weren't unusual for Africans. They got on with it. They loved the game, and they wanted to succeed. And obviously, some of the young men never made it to London. In some cases, because they didn't have quite the right attitude, perhaps, to get in the final squad. But you know, those lads are dedicated to the game, and they have dreams of making it in the game. And you know, whatever happens in their lives, those of them that got to London can always say that they represented you know, their community on an international stage. They represented Zimbabwe, and that's a hell of an achievement. Something they should all be very, very proud of. And they went through those things you mentioned, the 17 guys in a truck, and you know, a time when we had really no equipment for training, and times were hard, but we made it. You know.
Yeah, you did make it. So you also, while you became a Kremlin spy, at the same time you became a mini celebrity on Russian TV. So is that sort of a double-sided coin, if you will?
It was funny. I mean, going back to what we were saying about the spy thing, it was I left the London World Cup and went immediately to the Russian World Cup, and was expecting to have a very quiet time of things. And it was quite funny because all the media thing kind of exploded, and I got invited onto a couple of Russian things, and I'd been doing media with Matabeleland for several months, so I'd kind of got more used to doing it and saying yes every time I was invited to do interviews. So I just continued with the same opinion, and when I was asked in Russia, I just agreed to do things. I think I came across fairly well, and at the same time, the social media I was doing was just capturing more and more interest. I mean, to put it in context, my Twitter account, I only have 3,500 followers on there, but I had almost 2 million views just in 1 month, in July, I think, of my tweets. So it just tells you that something just went a little bit crazy there for a while. And yeah, and as often happens in the media, you get invited onto a couple of things, and before you know it, it's 5 or 6 things. I don't think my story was particularly interesting. I think it was just it gathered a bit of momentum at the time.
What would you say were some, or perhaps the most challenging day you faced in Zimbabwe?
The most challenging, sorry,
day, just or it could be 2 days, or just a span
well,
of.
there were two things. I mean, one was, yeah, around the time that of Mugabe's removal, just because there was a sense of everybody was kind of off the streets. We didn't know where it was going to go. I was wondering whether it was safe to continue. So that certainly that time, and more so, it was when we were trying to get the visas together for the players. We were due to leave to go to London, and we still didn't have the visas. And we had 2 or 3 days there where it was crazy, really, what was going on, and getting from a stage where we had no players on the plane to getting all the players on the plane, and also not having the flight tickets, not having all the money. So that was, yeah, incredibly stressful, incredibly surreal couple of days that we had around that time.
Right. You know, you met one of the most famed Zimbabwean footballers ever, Bruce Grobbelaar.
Yeah,
And he eventually became your goalkeeping coach.
that's right.
Now, what was that meeting like, and how did you convince him to become the goalkeeping coach for Matabeleland?
Well, what happened with Bruce is he's as you mentioned, a Zimbabwean national. He's arguably the most famous player to ever put on a shirt for Zimbabwe. He started off his playing career in Matabeleland with the club team there, and we were trying to raise a lot of money to get the team to London. We needed awareness. We needed a bit of advice and expertise, and I just decided to email Bruce. And if you don't try, you don't know. I wasn't necessarily expecting to hear back from him, but he actually emailed me back the following day, said he was well aware of the project, and he'd be happy to meet me to discuss a potential involvement. The only problem was he was in Canada, I was in Latvia at the time. And we looked at our diaries, and there was a possibility of meeting in somewhere in England in March or April of last year. And I was back. I was back here in England for a while, and Bruce was around, and the most convenient place for us to meet, where we ended up meeting on a service station, motorway service station. He was driving south, I was driving north. And we met there. We sat down in a coffee shop there. I think he wanted to see whether I was genuine, whether I was trying to set him up. Perhaps maybe I was press, and it was, I was trying to fool him with, or it was a project that wasn't quite what it seemed. And I think he was happy with what I had to say to him. He was happy to help us, to be a brand ambassador. And then I, a little bit cheeky, asked him, would he be a goalkeeper coach for us? And he said, yeah, he'd do it. I also had the idea in my mind at that point, I would have him as a fourth choice goalkeeper as well, and maybe give him, 5 minutes at the end of the game. But I didn't want to put him off by saying that to him at the time. But yeah, he very fortuitously for us, he agreed to get involved, and he joined us in London.
This book, One Football No Nets, it seems like just a fascinating story about your adventure towards chasing your dreams. Really, what is next in your pursuit of your dreams? What's next for you?
I'm planning to go to Brazil for the Copa America in the summer. That's something I've been to a couple of Copa Americas before, but I want to spend an extended period of time out there. So I'm hoping to go out to Brazil for 3 months. And you never know, there might be coaching opportunities. There might be something interesting to do out there. So I want to have a look at Brazil. But then really, I'm thinking maybe to get involved with another team in a similar situation to Matabeleland, perhaps in the autumn, and perhaps look to try and take them to a tournament, or take them to a point where they've really seriously developed. So that's one thought I've got at the moment. But really, I'm happy to. There's lots of things I enjoy doing in my life, and it doesn't necessarily have to be football. Yeah, it might be to do with travel. It might be to do with music. I don't know, but I'm sort of open to living life and doing things that make me happy. Spending time. I'm currently with my mum at the moment, spending a few weeks, and that's priceless. So.
Course.
It's just about being happy, I think, at the end of the day. And I think if you do something that helps people, that's a two-way street. You gain a happiness from helping others as well. So perhaps something in that way.
Do you think that would you recommend this, to a lot of other young British or just young coaches in general? Trying to find their footing And would you recommend going to, another club or team who's really needs your help and just in volunteering, trying to.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. There's opportunities out there, and if you're sensible about it, it's not going to knock you back, hugely financially. But if you're in a position, you're a person that's not got a family, you've not got a mortgage, and you want to further yourself, perhaps, rather than spending 6 or 7 seasons with a local club trying to get somewhere and feeling like you're banging your head against the wall, maybe look at going somewhere like Matabeleland, where you've got an opportunity to help people. There's teams all over Africa, for example, that are crying out for coaches to come in and give a bit of structure to what they're doing, who have amazing players, and very grateful people. And I think that's a great thing to get on your CV to prove that you can do something like that as well. The badges are important, but getting that experience, I'd say the same as a player. Too many players, especially from my country of England, they don't think of going abroad, and to break through in this country is extremely difficult. But go somewhere and give it a try. Show people what you can do, and I think it's an investment. The same as you go to university and you spend 4 years at university and it costs you a lot of money. Think about going somewhere and coaching, and if you're going to go somewhere where they need help, you're also giving a lot as well.
What do you think, just going from your experience as a coach, what do you think are some common errors you see as in a lot of young coaches, perhaps trying to prioritize a big move or expending your energy at the expense of your own health? What are some pieces of advice you have for other aspiring coaches?
I think for young coaches, you very often time. You have a strange perception of time. You think you want everything today, and I think you got to remember that hopefully life is not too short, and you've got the opportunity to focus on where you want to go, what you want to do in the future, and say to yourself, I'm going to go there now. I'm going to give it an opportunity to go somewhere completely different and try something. And there isn't such a thing as failure, really, because if it doesn't work out for you, you'll have learned a lot and you'll have developed as a coach, for example. So don't just look at life from one angle, that there's only, you're stuck in a rut, you're in one little town, and there's a club down the road and that's all there is. That's not the case. There's lots of opportunities out there, but they might mean you stepping away from your safety zone to do them. But there's definitely, yeah. If that's your passion, give it a go and try and push yourself to places and doing things that beyond your comfort zone.
Do you want to have an active role in? Do you expect to have an active role in just getting African football to reach its potential?
African football it's a huge thing. I think African football's on that road, because you just have to look at the top leagues now and see all the the top professionals who've now made it in the game, and the demand for those kinds of players. So I think African football's on the up. There is development in several countries in terms of football. There's better and better coaches working in those places, and I think we all just contribute a little bit towards something, and it's helping people believe that there are opportunities. Africa's now full of young men who see successful African players playing for the likes of Liverpool and Arsenal, and they can dream and they can believe. And there's a, there's an endless supply of fantastic footballers out there. So I think the potential is just starting to be realised, but it's sort of unlimited in many ways,
Right. What do you think is holding Africa back in terms of development of young players? Do you feel like there needs to be more? Do you feel like there needs to be more investment into academies so that a lot of African players don't have to go to Europe, or do you think that's just inevitable? Like they'll naturally go to Europe just to be.
No, Zach, it's just a different world. There's you're talking about most African countries where they're just people are surviving on almost nothing, and there's not real pitches, there's not real facilities. Guys don't have real boots. In fact, people don't even play with real footballs. They're just incredible players out there who've learnt to play the game on the street, and it's hard to imagine compared to the likes of North America and Europe. It's a completely different world. So every bit of development that comes their way takes them forward, and that's just maybe even just having a real football to play with, or a good surface to play on. I mean, we're so fortunate in what we have in the West, and I think that's another thing. You talk about young coaches. I think to go out to be in that environment, it's very grounding as well, and it makes a lot of coaches appreciate what they have, and perhaps not be frustrated when things are not working out for them as well.
What's just one thing you want people to take away from One Football No Nets?
I'd just say it's to try and follow your dreams at the end of the day. None of us know how long we've got here, and I think when I set out on that adventure, people doubted me. I think a few people laughed at me, and that's fine. I think I would have perhaps done the same about other people, but it's I had an incredible adventure, and I made a lot of friends, and I feel like I made a positive difference. But that really only came about because I just took the gamble and tried it. I might not be here now telling you the story. It might have I might not have even got into Zimbabwe, and there wouldn't be a story to tell. But yeah, you don't know unless you try. And write down your dreams and chase them. Don't just say I'll know tomorrow. If you're going to do something, think about doing it today.
Right. I know you've got a play to get to, so I'll let you go now. But thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about this book. This looks fascinating, and I can't wait for my copy to get here so I can read it.
Thank you, Zach. I really appreciate you having me on, man. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed it.
Hope to talk to you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
See ya. Bye-bye.